The golden light of the afternoon sun stretched long across the quiet streets of Rockview, a town where the days passed uneventfully until this one. A hush hung in the air as the doors of the Chase Bank creaked open. In stepped an old man, his tattered coat hanging loosely off his frail shoulders. A worn cap covered most of his face, but the sharp glint in his eyes peeked out beneath the brim. Over one shoulder he carried a heavy sack, the rough fabric bearing the stains of age and youth. Inside, a few customers milled about, while tellers worked behind polished counters. The old man's entrance barely caused a ripple. He looked like any other wanderer, the kind who might come in to ask for a few spare bills rather than make a deposit. But when he stepped into the center of the lobby, his voice, steady yet quiet, cut through the background noise. "This bank is mine." Silence fell for a heartbeat before someone chuckled. A ripple of laughter spread among the bank employees and customers alike. A security guard standing near the entrance smirked, arms crossing over his broad chest. A teller whispered something to her co-worker, shaking her head in amusement. Even the branch manager, a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed suit, let out a small chuckle. But their laughter wouldn't last. The security guard, Stephen, took a step forward, his presence imposing. "Sir, you seem a little lost. Why don't you have a seat while we call someone to help you?" The old man didn't budge. Instead, he adjusted the sack on his shoulder and let it drop to the floor. The sound it made wasn't the soft rustle of cloth, but a deep, solid thud that echoed across the marble tiles. The laughter faded instantly. "I'm not lost," the man said. "This bank belongs to me." The branch manager, Tomus Temp, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm afraid that's not possible," he said with polite patience. "Perhaps you mean you have an account here." The old man tilted his head. "An account? Son, I built this bank." A few nervous chuckles flickered through the room, but they were uncertain now. Stephen, more wary than before, inched forward. "All right, sir. Maybe you should tell us what's in that sack." The old man smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. It was the kind of smile that carried the weight of years, of memories buried and now unearthed. Slowly he bent down and unfastened the sack, peeling it open. The sight inside stole the air from the room. Bundles of money spilled onto the floor, not just any bills, but faded banknotes, wrapped in paper bands stamped with an emblem that had not been used for over half a century. A leather-bound ledger followed, its pages yellowed with time. The branch manager stared, his face draining of color. "What? What is this?" Temp asked, stepping forward hesitantly. The old man gave a slow nod. "Proof," he said simply. "Proof that this bank was mine long before any of you walked through its doors." Stephen frowned, his hand hovering near his belt. "Even if this money is old, that doesn't mean—" "My name is in that ledger," Temp hesitated, then crouched and picked up the worn book. His fingers skimmed through the delicate pages until they stopped. His lips parted slightly as his eyes locked onto a name. "C.K. Kirby," he whispered. A gasp rippled through the room. A woman near the counter covered her mouth. A man near the exit muttered something under his breath. The name wasn't just familiar. It was legendary. C.K. Kirby had been one of the bank's original founders, but he had disappeared decades ago, long presumed dead. Temp shook his head. "That can't be. If Kirby were alive today, he'd be well over 100 years old." The old man's sharp eyes gleamed. "And yet, here I stand." A heavy silence settled over the bank, thick as fog. No one laughed now, no one moved. The weight of the moment pressed down on them all as Temp flipped through the ledger, his face growing paler with each page. This ledger is real," he murmured, "and it says that—" His throat went dry. "You were one of the founders." The old man nodded. "I was." Temp swallowed. "If that's true, then what happened to you? Why did you disappear?" The old man exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Betrayal," he said simply. "My own business partner, John Williams, we built this bank together, but greed makes monsters of men. One day he changed the documents, convinced the board I was unfit to lead, and in a matter of hours I was erased, my name stripped from records, my legacy stolen." A murmur spread through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, trying to process the impossible tale unfolding before them. Kirby's voice hardened. "I fought. I tried to reclaim what was mine, but every door closed, every voice that once called me a friend turned away. So one day I vanished, because that's what they wanted." He looked around the room, eyes dark with decades of loss. "For me to disappear." Tem's throat bobbed as he swallowed again. "And now you're back." Kirby gave a single nod. "Now I'm back." His fingers tightened around the sack again. A ripple of tension coursed through the room as he reached inside once more. A woman near the entrance gasped and took a step back. Stephen tensed, his hand flying to his holster. Kirby's hand emerged, and what he held in his grip made the entire room gasp. A stack of papers, yellowed with age, stamped and signed, lay in the old man's hands as he extended them toward Temp. The branch manager hesitated before reaching out, his fingers brushing against the brittle pages. His eyes darted over the text, his expression tightening with every word. Then suddenly he froze, his hands trembling slightly. "Oh my God," he whispered. Stephen, still tense, leaned in. "What is it?" he asked, his voice sharp with unease. Temp swallowed hard, his gaze shifting between the old man and the papers. "These documents, they show that he never sold the bank." A small, satisfied nod came from Kirby. "That's right." Temp shook his head in disbelief, his mind racing. "If these are real—" He turned toward the framed certificates hanging on the wall behind him, each bearing the name of the Matt family, the dynasty that had ruled over the bank for generations. He exhaled sharply. "Then this bank was stolen from you." The crowd stirred, murmurs rising in volume. Kirby inhaled deeply. "I've spent my whole life fighting to prove it, and now, here I am." The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone like a thick, dark storm rolling in. Just moments ago, the man before them had been a laughingstock, a confused relic of the past. Now he stood as a force of truth, revealing a hidden chapter of history long buried beneath polished floors and shining chandeliers. Temp's mind reeled. If the documents were real, and they certainly looked it, then C.K. Kirby had a rightful claim to this building, to everything within it. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. The workers who had chuckled before now stood rigid, their faces pale. The customers, once indifferent, now clutched their belongings, as if realizing they were part of something far bigger than themselves. Stephen, still positioned near Kirby, shifted his stance, his fingers hovering close to his belt, unsure if the situation called for authority or restraint. Outside, the world carried on. Cars passed, pedestrians walked the sidewalks, oblivious to the seismic revelation unfolding inside. But within the bank, time had slowed to a crawl. Kirby bent down and lifted a bundle of aged banknotes from his sack, his fingers gliding over the faded paper. This money had once represented his success, his legacy. Now, it was evidence of his loss, a relic of what had been taken from him. The years of struggle, the decades of being erased, sat heavy on his shoulders, but his hands remained steady. Temp's throat tightened. He had devoted his career to this institution, to its history, its principles. But the foundation he had believed in was crumbling beneath him. He stood at a crossroads. Bury the truth once more, or confront it head-on? A clock somewhere in the distance chimed the hour. The air inside the bank felt thick with expectation. Kirby waited, silent and unwavering. The grand chandeliers, the polished brass plaques, the towering columns, all of it had been built upon stolen ground, and for the first time in years, the ghost of that truth had stepped into the light. Temp knew what had to be done. Clutching the fragile papers, he turned on his heel and strode toward the back office. The board of directors had to see this. Lawyers would need to be called. But as his hand reached for the door, he hesitated. He already knew how this would play out. The Matt family would deny it. They would call the documents fraudulent, tie the case up in endless legal battles. Time was on their side, and they would wait, hoping that Kirby, an old man with limited years left, would fade away before justice could be served. A soft murmur rippled through the employees gathered near the counter. A young teller, no older than 25, stepped forward. She bent down, hesitated, then picked up one of the aged banknotes. Turning it over in her hands, she studied it for a long moment before gently placing it on the counter, as if acknowledging something sacred. One by one, the other employees followed suit. Another teller stepped forward. Then another. Each placed a piece of Kirby's past onto the counter, a silent tribute to his claim, his truth, his stolen legacy. Stephen, the security guard, shifted his stance once more. His hand, once ready to draw his weapon, now hung at his side. He looked at Kirby and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. The old man watched them, his face unreadable. There was nothing more to say, no more battles to fight. He had walked in with nothing but the weight of his story, and now, for the first time in decades, people were finally listening. Temp finally broke the silence, his voice low. "This isn't over," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. No, it wasn't over, but it had begun. Kirby exhaled slowly. He turned and walked toward the door, his step steady and certain. He did not look back. He didn't need to. For the first time in a very long time, he had won.